Welcome to this module of Professor Messer's free Microsoft 7680 certification training course. I'm James Messer, and in this module we're going to work with drivers. We're going to find a way to get this hardware that we have in our computer able to interact with the Windows 7 operating system. If we look at our exam requirements, that we are now in the configuring hardware and applications section. This is 14% of the exam, where we need to understand how to configure devices. We need to understand updating, disabling, and uninstalling drivers. We need to look at what signed drivers are, how you resolve conflicts between drivers, how you can configure driver settings, and resolve problems with device drivers. We'll look at all of that in this video and much more. Before we start poking around with our driver configurations and trying to get them to work properly, I think we should take a step back and talk about why we even have drivers to begin with. This is one of the challenges you have with any operating system. This isn't something specific to Windows or even to Windows 7. It doesn't matter what operating system you're using, you have to have device drivers. Out of the box, your operating system has no idea how to talk to all of this different hardware that might be connected. It might be a video card made by one company, a mouse made by another company, a keyboard made by a third, and so on. So you have to find some way to get this operating system that's very generic to talk to some hardware, which is something that's very specific. These device drivers bridge the gap. They allow the operating system to have a common language that it can use to communicate to all of these very diverse pieces of hardware that you have connected to your computer. One thing to keep in mind, that even though Windows is made by Microsoft, there's Windows XP, there's Windows 7, there's Windows Server 2008, each one of those operating systems is a little bit different, and you will need very specific device drivers for the version of the operating system that you're using. So you can't expect to take drivers that worked in Windows XP and have them work in Windows 7. You need device drivers that have been specifically written to work with Windows 7. Now, there's a reason you keep all of these things updated. If there are problems communicating or working with a particular piece of hardware, then it's going to cause a problem for you. That's why whenever you call technical support and you're having a problem with a video card or you're having a problem with a keyboard, one of the very first things they ask is, what version of the driver are you using? Have you downloaded the latest drivers from our website, because we've resolved some problems in the latest version, and now the particular issues that you're seeing may have already been resolved. If you'd like to see the drivers that are running on your computer, one way to get to those is right from the control panel. If you're running in the icon view in control panel, there's an icon right there that says Device Manager. You can also get to the same Device Manager if you go to your Start menu and you right mouse click your computer, choose Manage, and you can choose within there to go to the Device Manager, or you can simply run this devmgmt.msc. All of those things will bring you into this Device Manager right here. Now, once you get into the Device Manager, you'll be able to see some very specific information about every single piece of hardware that's connected to your operating system. We can go into the properties and you'll see tabs across every property of every piece of hardware that give you a little bit of information about driver information, the details about the driver, the resources that the driver happens to be using. There's a lot in there. And depending on the piece of hardware that you're looking at, you may see additional tabs pop up, or you may see that some tabs aren't even there. Just depends on the piece of hardware you're looking at. Let's go into our Device Manager and look to see how we might find some of those things. On my Windows 7 machine, I'm going to go down here to the Start menu and choose Control Panel. And within the Control Panel is an option for Device Manager. The Device Manager lists by default everything by type. We are grouping together all of the different like items. We can also view them by connection, and I can view them by resources as well. If we were to click some of these little arrows, these triangles next to it, it will expand out and show us all of the little devices underneath. So you can see every one of the things you would expect to see hardware-wise: graphics adapters, hard drives. We can see keyboards and mice and monitors are on here. So it really doesn't matter what type of hardware you're looking at. In the view, at least we have access to these things to see what's available to it. If you wanted to see information about the network adapter, we can right mouse click and choose Properties, and you can see that it gives us a number of tabs across the top to show us the different options for the general tab. The device is working properly. This is a great place to go to see if your devices are working the way you would expect. Under the advanced mode, you can see all of the different options that are available for this particular piece of hardware. These things are very specific to a network card. If you wanted to change the options for jumbo packets or change the priority and the VLAN, if those capabilities are enabled or disabled, you would do that within this option under the Advanced tab. If we were looking at a keyboard, those options would not be available under the Advanced tab because these are specific to the network adapter. The driver option, we're going to look at this in a moment, is used to be able to perform upgrades or to roll back or even disable and uninstall different drivers in your computer. That can be very useful when you're troubleshooting or needing to upgrade easily. The details view we will use also to get information about, for instance, the class of the device. That GUID, or the GUID as some people will call it, is very useful when you want to set policies on what users can install what drivers. We're going to do some of that in this video. There's a resources tab that also becomes very useful when we want to be able to troubleshoot perhaps conflicts that may be existing with particular resources. And this adapter has options also for power management. We can turn off this device to save power if it's not currently in use. So that's how you'd go into a single device and get information about, is that device driver working, the resources, and the other information specific to that piece of hardware. The device manager is also a great place to go to get information about how your USB ports are performing. As you may recall, with certain USB hubs, there's a certain amount of power that's available on each port on the hub, and there's a certain amount of bandwidth that is available for each particular adapter or controller that you have for USB. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom. There's a different section just for universal serial bus controllers. I have 2 controllers here and then 2 USB root hubs, which are central hubs for the USB connections. If I right mouse click on any of the controllers and choose properties, under the Advanced tab, you'll notice the Advanced tab will show you how much bandwidth is currently being consumed by all of the devices that are using that controller. So if you're running into problems with a USB device that is working not the way you would expect, maybe it is a camera and you're seeing choppy feedback, maybe you're using a microphone, a USB connected microphone, and it's getting choppy and you're wondering, am I exceeding the bandwidth available for this USB controller? This is exactly where you would go to look. As you may also know, each of those USB devices may need a particular amount of power. So if we go to the hub and right mouse click and choose properties, there is a power tab available that says this hub is self-powered. Total power available is 500 milliamps per port, and then it will tell you of the ports that are available how much power is required for all of those. So that's also a nice place to go to see if perhaps you're using too much power. You may need to get a powered USB hub that can give you some additional capabilities, some additional power, depending on the number of devices and the types of devices that you're plugging into your USB hub. As you can probably tell by now, device drivers are some pretty important pieces of software. They are sitting right above your operating system and are essentially protecting you from the direct access to the operating system. And because of that, the only people by default that can install device drivers are administrators. You can also change who is able to install drivers and the types of drivers they're able to install by using some group policy settings that we're going to look at next. Whenever you install drivers, you'll notice that it also gives you the options to how you will install the driver. You can have Windows automatically download device driver software and the icons for those devices automatically, or you can say always install it from Windows Update. Install it from Windows Update if it's not already on my computer, or never go out to Windows Update to install. And if you're in a very, very large environment with a lot of computers, you may prefer not going out to Microsoft and using your internet bandwidth for that. You may want to manage all of your drivers internally. So you may want to set configurations within each computer so that it never installs driver software from Windows Update. Those are just some of the things that you can manage. And what we'll do is look at how you would manage that on your Windows 7 desktop. If you go to your Windows 7 desktop and you go to the start and you simply type device installation, you'll notice one of the options that comes up is change device installation settings. And this is exactly what we were just looking at. You can go into your computer and modify this. You can also set group policies for this that would affect everybody that is in your domain. But this is a very easy way on an individual desktop basis to manage that function. If you've ever taken a device and plugged it into your computer and found that it automatically found the drivers for that device and it started working automatically, that's because the drivers were already loaded onto that system. They may have already been preloaded as part of the operating system, or the administrators of that system may have pre-staged those drivers just to be waiting and available for you in case you might need them. Those types of drivers are called plug-and-play drivers. And like the name implies, you simply plug in the device and then you begin immediately playing with it. It immediately starts working the way it should. Windows is able to automatically recognize it, find the drivers specific to it, and load it up. It has all of those drivers in a store here. If you look into your registry on your Windows 7 system under HKey Local Machine, Software, Microsoft Windows current version, there is a device path option that specifies where Windows will go to download those drivers. And if you're administering a lot of different systems, you can even set that up to be a certain set of directories on a computer where you just keep all of the drivers there. And as you have new drivers, you load them into that directory, and Windows will always be able to find those just by modifying that particular piece of the registry. Once it finds the drivers, you'll notice that it copies it over to Windows System 32 drivers, makes a lot of other changes in your system as well. You can't just take your drivers and put them in Windows System 32 drivers and expect them to work. But ultimately, that's where it ends up copying the driver file specifically. If you are the administrator and you would like to pre-stage some of these drivers so that they're already in the operating system and waiting for someone to use them, you can use a program called PNP-Util to be able to add, remove, and see what drivers are already there. Let's look at that section of the registry just so you can see what is there. We'll type regedit and hit enter. And of course, the registry editor is something that Windows wants to make sure with its user account control that you know what's going on. So we'll say yes. And I've already gone to this particular section. You can see it is under your HKey Local Machine under Software, Microsoft. We'll go all the way down to Windows under Current Version. And here is the device path. The default device path, notice, is %systemroot%. That is an automatic function that puts a variable in there based on where your Windows is installed. \-inf. You want to be sure to leave that in your system. That's where you'd like it to go. And you can add other device paths to this. You could put a semicolon and then specify if on everybody's machine you're putting it into the drivers directory, you can simply add it. What Windows will do, it will go into that directory and any other directories within it. So you want to be careful when you're adding these that it's not going to be, for instance, just the /. Your system could spend a lot of time going through every single directory on your computer trying to find those drivers. But // drivers is probably a good place to put it. And now whenever you add that to the registry, this particular computer will go down this list of device paths until it finds the device that it needs, or it will prompt you and say, I can't find the device. Where would you like to load that device from? Let's also look at the PNP-Util program. I'm going to just go to a command line CMD and type PNP-Util, and we'll get a list of all of the things you can do with this utility. We can add a package, we can enumerate packages, and we can delete packages. This is a way that we could stage these drivers prior to the user actually plugging in that new monitor or that new printer or that new camera. You can already have those drivers available. After all, your users by default don't have access to install the drivers. But if you're already installing them first, they'll have no problem once they plug in that piece of hardware. For instance, if we did a PNP-Util and we did a -E to enumerate, you'll see all of the different drivers that are loaded onto this computer already. These are the third-party drivers, and if you recall from the video where we were able to add drivers into a Windows image using DISM, this looks familiar to you, the OEM0, OEM1, OEM2.inf files, and you can see the different drivers that were installed for each one of these. That's a very, very easy way to put the drivers in place, have them ready for the users, and make the process as easy as possible and as seamless as possible for your users whenever they want to load up some new hardware onto their system. The vast majority of hardware you're going to run into these days is plug and play. You simply plug the system in, you install the piece of hardware, you turn on the computer, and it automatically finds it and works perfectly. But occasionally you will run into some legacy hardware that doesn't have that plug and play capability. You then need to do everything manually. You need to load the drivers yourself. You need to find the drivers, load them, and make sure that they're going to work properly. Fortunately, that's also very, very easy to do using the capabilities for adding hardware within Windows 7. To add these legacy hardwares, you might expect the device manager is the perfect place to go. If we right mouse click on the computer name, you have the option to add legacy hardware. And it even takes you through a wizard and lets you know that you're going to need the driver for that hardware. And it will either give you the option to search for the hardware automatically. It won't be able to know what that hardware is, but it will recognize that something new is there, even if it can't recognize it. Or you can manually select from a list, which is interesting. Then you can decide this is a printer, this happens to be a modem, it is an adapter of some type. And then depending on the type of hardware you choose, it may take you through a wizard, or it may simply prompt you to load the drivers that you need. And I'm going to say, for instance, for the modem, don't try to detect it. I'm just going to find it in a list. It will go out to the Windows operating system and pull down all of the legacy modems it happens to know, and then you can add it into this list. If this is not in your list, you have a piece of hardware that Windows doesn't know about, there's an option here that says, oh, I have the disk. You simply point it to where those INF files are for the driver, and it will install the drivers then. And at that point, Windows is good. It knows the driver, it sees the piece of hardware, and at that point, you're able to use that legacy piece of hardware. By default, only the administrator can install drivers, but there may be times when you would like the end users to be able to install certain drivers. Maybe you've deemed a certain class of drivers or a very specific driver to be okay, and you can specify in your group policies that a particular user or everybody on your network has rights and abilities and permissions to be able to install those particular drivers. There's some other capabilities when you're looking at the local group policies, specifically to drivers, where you can look at allowing administrators to override those policies, allowing drivers that match certain classes have a message that pops up whenever somebody is installing something and you're not preventing it. You have a message that pops up that says, sorry, you can't install this driver. Call the help desk at this number and we'll help you out with this. There's also device IDs and changes on when these particular policies go into effect. You can see you can force a reboot when required for policy changes to take effect, or just prevent the installation of certain devices. If you don't want anybody to plug in a removable hard drive or a particular USB key, these are the group policies that allow you to restrict those or allow them in your environment. If you look in your group policy, you'll see these in your local computer configuration under Administrative Templates. Under System, there is a Device Installation folder, and within there, a Device Installation Restrictions folder. And that's where you'll find all of these. And you can specify how different things are allowed. You can allow or prevent, for instance, drivers using particular setup classes. Here's a good way to try to get some of these changes to go into effect. What you're looking to have is finding the GUID of that particular class of driver. Let's do exactly that. Let's go to our control panel and find our device manager, and I'm going to allow my users, for instance, to install the drivers for this Intel Pro 1000 MT desktop adapter. I'm going to right mouse click and choose the properties for that. Under our details tab, there's an option here for the device class GUID. This is this big, long, very unique number, a globally unique identifier that I can right mouse click and choose copy. Now I can go back to my group policy. I would like to enable this group policy, and I can click the show button, and simply in my values section, I can paste into this the drivers that I would like to use for this setting. And let's choose the ones that we just did. I just did a Control V and pasted in those drivers. And now I've got them in my list. They are now enabled in my group policy. And now if any of my users, there they are enabled, any of my users now find that they have that network adapter, I've now said that they can allow the installation of those devices using drivers that match those particular device setup classes. And you can simply manage and control all of those. Now, obviously, this can really cause a lot of administrative overhead if you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of drivers. So by setting by either specific classes or specific IDs, you may want to mix and match some of those just so you can keep the amount of administration down to a minimum. Otherwise, you may be spending all of your time just managing what drivers can be installed and which can't. If you need to update a driver, this is the place to go. You can go to this view under the properties for every driver in the driver tab, and you have an option here to update the driver. Maybe you've downloaded a new driver from the manufacturer's website and you would like to apply that into the system. That's a great place to go. You could completely uninstall the driver that's there. Sometimes the manufacturer will tell you before you install this driver, you have to completely uninstall the one that's already there. So you have to go through that process first. Or maybe you just want to turn off this piece of hardware so the operating system does not use it. You can simply click the disable button and that driver is now not available to the operating system and you won't be able to use that piece of hardware. Prior to plug and play operations and the computers that we use these days, everything had to be done manually. When you configured a computer, you had to make sure that none of the address ranges overlapped with each other, that the pieces of hardware weren't sharing similar IRQs or interrupts inside of your computer. And if you did have a conflict, you'd have to go in and change dip switches, you'd have to change jumpers on adapter cards, and try to find so that all of the pieces of hardware could work very well together. Fortunately, Windows takes care of a lot of that for us. We don't have to worry about it so much. And so Windows, or if you go to your resources tab, tells you these are the memory ranges that I found and the IRQs that I'm using for this particular piece of hardware. And it will tell you if there are any conflicts with other pieces of hardware inside of your computer. Sometimes the hardware conflicts that you'll find are by design. They may be on the same piece of hardware, the same physical adapter card, for instance, but most of the time you'll see no conflicts listed in here. If you'd like to get a much larger list of all of the conflicts without having to go into every single individual piece of hardware, you can run msinfo 32 and you can look under hardware resources, under conflicts and sharing, and also under your software environment, your system drivers, to get more information about what drivers are on your system and are there any conflicts with those. If we run msinfo 32, you'll find a lot of great information available to you. Here is an overview of all of the hardware that's in my system. And as I told you, you can go into hardware resources and your first option there is under conflicts and sharing. And you can see all of the cases where you may have resource conflicts or IRQ conflicts with the hardware that's already installed into this computer. You can also go back to your resources on your computer, and if this is a non-plug and play piece of hardware, you can modify these IRQs and change the memory addresses, try to free up some of the spaces so that you don't have this kind of overlap, because if you try to use those two pieces of hardware at the same time, you're going to have a problem with that. You can also go to your software environment and get a list of every single driver that's on your system right under the system driver setting, and you can see the name and the description and the exact file of every single driver that's on here. So if you were trying to find out, do I have a particular driver loaded, what's the name of that driver, you can see it all is laid out for you quite nicely in the msinfo 32 program. Windows 7 also comes with a really nice troubleshooting utility that helps you verify that the drivers that you're using are working properly. This command line that we'll run is called Verifier, and you can either run it at the command line with command line parameters. If you don't use any parameters at all, it actually launches a GUI that allows you to walk through the configuration and troubleshooting of some of these driver settings. Let's start this at the command line. We'll type in verifier and hit enter, and you can see this is our driver verifier manager. We can select a task that we can use to create standard settings, custom settings, delete, display, or look at information about the currently verified drivers. And I haven't done anything special in here, but you could look and see everything that you would like to update, enable, or change associated with drivers that might be in your system. And I can choose a lot of different drivers that I might have. Here's everything that's in our drivers directory, and you can choose particular drivers to then get information on. And you can look and to see counters and details about this. And if you're a developer, or if you're just trying to do some troubleshooting of the viability of the drivers that are installed on your system, this is a great way to get some troubleshooting feedback and be able to communicate with the manufacturer of the hardware what you're seeing and how the driver's acting in your environment. If you've installed a driver before and you've seen it pop up and say that this driver is not signed, it's an unsigned driver, that's because it has not gone through a quality assurance check from Microsoft. And Microsoft digitally, cryptographically signs these particular drivers. So when you install them, you know that Microsoft checked it out, or you get a very clear message that Microsoft has not. If you have an environment where you're trying to install these, you may notice that only the administrators are able to install the unsigned drivers. This is not something you can allow the users to do. If you're in a 64-bit version of Windows, that really becomes important. Those 64-bit drivers must be signed to be able to install them. What you can do if you really need the users to install these drivers is if you have a certificate authority, that's something that's very specific to using this cryptographic function, you can sign it with that certificate authority because by default you've already pushed out that certificate to everybody's computer. And if you sign it with the certificate, the end users can trust that that certificate signature is okay to install on their computer. That's a much bigger conversation dealing with cryptographic and public key infrastructures that you might have, but it is an option. That's something that you need to have for your end users. Microsoft has this Windows Hardware Quality Lab so that you're able to make sure when you install the driver that you can trust it. It's gone through a quality process and you know the driver is going to interoperate properly with the operating system. You can use DirectX to also look at some of this information if you wanted to see what drivers are signed and which are not signed. There's also a program you can run called SigVerif, where it's a file signature verification to see exactly what your drivers look like. Let's run SigVerif on our computer, SigVerif, and hit enter, and it says this is a file signature verification. Click Advanced to customize the verification options. Click Start for any system files that are not digitally signed. We can check for those. So it's going to go through the process of scanning the device drivers on this computer and see just what the signatures are associated with those files. I'm running VirtualBox on my computer. In fact, this entire operating system that we've been using in Windows 7 has been a virtual system, and you can see that the VirtualBox files have not been digitally signed. So that can give you an idea if you're worried about the integrity of your operating system, or you're wondering if the drivers that are loaded on this computer have not gone through that check by Microsoft. That SigVerif program gives you a very, very easy way to find those. Let's review some of the topics from this video. What must be modified to allow users to install their own drivers? That's something you'd like the users to do instead of the administrator. Then you're going to have to modify your group policy settings to allow the users to do that. Our next question is, which utility can you use to give you a consolidated view of resource conflicts? If you recall, we ran this and it gave us just a big list of everything that gave us an I/O address mismatch, or we had IRQs that were being shared, and it was the MS Info 32 program. Our last question is, which program can verify driver signatures? And we just ran this. It was the SigVerif program that scanned all of the drivers on our computer and told us exactly which drivers were not signed by Microsoft. That covers our requirements for this video. We've gone through and looked at everything we needed to know about updating drivers, signing drivers, resolving conflicts between different drivers, and changing all kinds of different settings when working with the drivers in our Windows 7 operating system. If you'd like to see many more of our absolutely free Microsoft videos, if you'd like to participate in our message boards or just send me a message, you can visit our website at ProfessorMesser.com.